There's Copper and Caleb, right? Okay. Tell me about, like, when you were a kid, tell me about an average day in the Miller household.
An average day in the Miller household, my father was a garbage man. It was an independent business. It wasn't part of a large garbage hauling company. He inherited that from his father. My father was born in 1908, Henry John Miller. He was huge in height, but also in character. He was 6'4". He would have been a great basketball player, but he couldn't do it. He graduated from high school, was about to go to college, but his father, my Grandpa Miller, got very, very ill. Dad was the only boy in the family, so he took over the garbage business because somebody had to do it. But our average day, Dad and Mom would get up at 3:30 or 4 every morning. Mom, who is an angel impersonating a human being, Esther Marie Schnell Miller. She would make him a full breakfast. He would then go off and work drive his own truck. And in those days, what I remember, it wasn't a backpacking. He had to climb a ladder and dump garbage over the side of the truck into the bottom of the truck. Be that as it may, Mom would then get me and my sister Marilyn up, and we both practiced piano. Mom was almost always...
At like 4 in the morning?
No. She would get us up enough time to shower, practice piano, have breakfast, and get off to grade school.
So Grandma would wake up with Hank.
Yeah, 3:30 or 4.
They'd make his breakfast for him.
And then she'd stay up.
And then she'd
get Marilyn and me up. And that was the schedule. We always had dinner together. We each had our place at the table. My mother was a fantastic cook, but there was one meal that I have never enjoyed, and that was liver. And I wasn't very creative, but I tried to bury some of the liver under a napkin, and I never got away with it. But other things she made what's called a blina, which is like a Swedish pancake. I could have eaten them every day, as my sons Matthew and Andrew could verify. But that was the average day. I wasn't a brilliant student, but I was hardworking, and I had a personal rule, never turn in a paper late. That means that I made deadlines important. And I can honestly say, in 8 years of grade school, 4 years of college, 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, 3 years of seminary, never once did I turn a paper in late. I didn't get the top grades, but I figured if it was good enough to get into those schools, Stanford and Yale, that was okay. You ask about my typical day. We didn't have Little League. So some of the neighbors, we'd get a tennis ball and get a baseball bat. Dad cut it in half. And the driveway of the Miller house was where we played neighborhood tennis ball. And we called it Miller Field. So the telephone pole was first base. A tree was second base. The curb of the driveway was third base. And we played right in the street on Holman. Those were the days where we started. But really, life was school, family, church. I was never part of a gang. I didn't ever get a newspaper route. It just wasn't something that I ever thought about doing. The only really good friends were in my family, were my cousins. It was, you might say it was very, very family centered, but that's the way it was in the 1940s. We never talked politics. Oh, I got to tell you, Dad wanted to get a television. Portland didn't have television. So he bought a black and white television. It was almost like a console. But Portland didn't have television. Well, he had that taken care of. He got a 30-foot antenna and tied it to the chimney.
Oh, wow.
So pointed it north, and the only channel we could get was Channel 5 in Seattle, which was NBC. And I remember we could get the World Series. So I'd ride my bicycle to school. It was just a few blocks away. And for lunch, I would bicycle home to watch part of the World Series. But it wasn't a clear picture. There was a lot of snow in the picture because of the reception. So it was hard to see the baseball. You knew it was going somewhere, so we listened for what we were supposed to be seeing. And my mom would always fix ham and cheese toasted sandwiches. And so I had all that to look forward to. But when we ever did anything social, it was with families. So that's pretty much what I remember about my day.
What about high school?
It's interesting. What about high school? I didn't know how it would end up being a super important class, but I decided I would take typing. Now, in those days, the future of a woman or a female was you're going to be a secretary, you're going to be a wife and have kids, you're going to be a secretary, or you're going to be a teacher, or you're maybe going to be a nurse. So I was in this typing class. Miss Hobson was the teacher. I remember her. And we didn't have electric typewriters, but I had eye-hand coordination because I played the piano. And those girls in that class had no regard for me because I whipped them in terms of how many words per minute. And sometimes I get up to 70 and 75. The reason that's important, it has served me well every moment, especially in ministry, to write a sermon or to write a letter. I have written 7 murder mystery novels and published them. I've written a number of books about pastoral letters and hopefully inspiration. I now do a blog almost every day. So that's one class I remember. I want to talk about a second class, my senior year. The teacher was Miss Carly Gilstrap. She was great. She paid a lot of attention of where there was injustice in Portland. One of the things she was really concerned about is that some garbage men didn't go out to the public approved city dump, but there was a private dump. She took students. She'd always take the students that got Fs. So she'd give them field work so she didn't have to give them an F. And they went out to this private dump and took pictures of rats and then tried to write it up and give it to the newspaper. But one of her statements, I don't tell everything I know, when we ask her how she found things out. That was kind of what Miss Gilstrap was known for, not to say everything she knew. Well, anyway, one day in class, she found out that my dad was a garbage man. And it kind of went like this. Mark, isn't your dad a garbage man? Well, yes, Miss Gilstrap, he is. Does he use a public dump? Well, yes, he does. Does he use a private dump and create a problem? And it just came out of me. I looked at her and I said, Miss Gilstrap, I don't tell everything I know. And the class kind of gasped, geez, Mark. Well, Miss Gilstrap gave me an A+. And she said, Mark, you get it. You pay attention and you don't let anybody push over you. Congratulations. Well, I can remember that even at 79, something or other. But high school was good. We began to be integrated, and in those days it wasn't, there were a lot of races, let's face it. But what was really good about the high school I went to, and remember, I didn't play football. We had a football team my senior year, which was 1957. The quarterback was Terry Baker. He ended up going to Oregon State, won the Heisman Trophy in football, and at Oregon State, he played football and basketball and was All-American in both sports. There were two backfield guys by the name of Ray and Mel Renfro. Ray Renfro was the best. He was he weighed probably about 200 pounds. He was a fullback. He died when he was 18 of a heroin overdose. But Mel Renfro went to the University of Oregon. He ended up being a defensive back and then was drafted and played probably 10 or 12 years for the Dallas Cowboys. And they were in the backfield. We went undefeated my senior year, and our biggest rival, I remember this, gosh, it hasn't come back to me for a while. Anyway, our biggest rival was Grant. And so it was important to beat Grant. Games were always Friday night. That Friday night at Jeff, in a rainstorm, Jeff, led by Terry Baker and Mel Renfro, beat Grant 72-0.
Oh my gosh.
And we just loved it. In fact, at one time I remember we had 4th and 1 on about the 30-yard line of Grant, and Baker passed for a touchdown. Some of my best friends went to Grant. We didn't ever talk about that game.
Okay, what about you in basketball though? So you and Terry Baker were
we played. He played on our basketball team, and I was what you might call a point guard. Terry was probably 6'3", so in those days he played forward, and most teams used a zone defense against us. So we used what's called a 1-3-1 offense, where Terry just pretty well stuck by the free throw line in the key, and my job was to dribble around, look one way, and pass the other way to Terry. So we didn't keep assists, but I probably won the assist title feeding Terry Baker. The one regret I have, as good as Terry Baker was, we never made the state tournament because there were other teams that were better than we.
Tell me about, what was your relationship like with your father?
I had a wonderful relationship with my father. Probably the best moment that I remember was my senior year in high school. The first couple of games I did very poorly batting. So I came home and he said, Mark, and he never pushed. He always asked, can I be of help? I said, sure. So we went out on Miller Field, our driveway, and he took a bat and he showed me, this is how you swing. There's a better way to swing. Swing with a little bit of a down angle, and that made all the difference in the world. The fact that he stood by that Douglas fir tree when I pitched my first game as a freshman. The other thing about my dad, I didn't know. I was baptized in the German Congregational Church, Zion Congregational Church. The tradition, the godparents would carry the baby up for the baptism, not for Hank Miller. No way, I'm carrying my son up. So my mom said to him, Hank, that's fine, you do that. I want you to be in church every Sunday with me. and my dad kept that. But he carried me up for baptism, and it was the only baptism they had where the father was that involved. So he was always my best support. Well, Mom was too. They really, really cared and loved me a whole lot.
And tell me about your relationship with your mom.
My relationship with my mom, I always wanted to make sure that whatever I did, I would feel good about, and she wouldn't be shamed or disappointed. She was almost a moral barometer for me. I didn't smoke, I didn't drink, I hardly ever dated. So all the main things, and I couldn't drive till I was 16. I remember Mom would always say, enjoy yourself and be careful. So I just knew that she was with me. She often came to, both Mom and Dad came to Chicago when we had Matthew and Matthew was baptized. They came to Eugene when you were born and baptized. They came to Colorado. They were always there, but they paid just as much attention to my sister. And so that made it good that we each knew how much we were loved. And family was really centered, much more than I think it is today.
Tell me about Marilyn.
Marilyn had, God rest her soul, she died 2 years ago. Marilyn was alive with a great sense of humor. She totally loved life. She wasn't arrogant. She didn't have to have the centering of any social event. She and Larry, her husband, have 3 kids, Brian and Derek and Andrea, each of whom is married. Marilyn was a kindergarten teacher, and the families where their child was with Marilyn just raved. They were in a small city, most of their married life, Marilyn and Larry, in a city called Estacada. Larry was a high school social studies teacher and was a baseball coach. Marilyn taught kindergarten. And I guess the word that strikes me about Marilyn is that she was vibrant and it was very authentic. She cared so much for how and where people were. She was always fixing food for people when they came home from the hospital. She was a terrific mother and a great grandmother. So the fullness of her life, I didn't overshadow her, which I could, because honestly, I was very prominent in the newspaper and everything with the fact of where I went to college, the fact that I had athletic and decided ministry. But Marilyn had her own life. She went to Linfield College in McMinnville, Oregon. That's where she met Larry. They had a fabulous marriage. When Marilyn died, it came almost as a shock because she had not been ill and she just died in her sleep. And that was just, that was devastating. But on the other hand, we celebrated her life, and I do. I don't continually, but when I think about her, I smile.
What was the brother-sister relationship like growing up?
Marilyn went to a different grade school. And I think the reason for that, she went to Fabian grade school and then she went to Grant High School. Now, what happened is that the school districts were changed. So where we lived went from Vernon grade school to Fabian and then from Jeff High School to Grant. But I think also my parents didn't want Marilyn to go where she would be known as Mark Miller's sister. She needed to have her own identity. And she and her best friend is Cindy Shoup, who I think is still alive. And so Marilyn could develop her own identity that wasn't in some kind of a shadow to her brother. That's just about it. It was the individual time for her was respected.